Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. In today's video, we're going to briefly analyze Kai Havertz's role and impact in Arsenal's narrow 1-0 win against Crystal Palace. So first, we're going to briefly touch on Arsenal's system, then we'll isolate Havertz's role, and then we'll look to the impact that he provided in the final third, the middle third, and his own third. So when we break it all down and we do look at the board, we have Arsenal here in their 4-3-3 and Crystal Palace in their 4-2-3-1 that eventually became a 4-4-2 out of possession. As we stated in the video earlier this week, Arsenal did shift into a 3-2-5 for large spells of that game, but there were situations where Thomas Partey did shift out towards the touchline zone and they became more of a 4-1-5. When you focus on Havertz in particular, his positioning starts in that midfield zone, but he was often adopting spaces in between the lines, just and beyond Doucouré and Ayew. And from here, there were situations where you'd witness him dropping in towards that pocket of space, even though that was rare to check in towards the ball. And from there, he would start in that central area and then begin to push forward in between the lines and then look to occupy space in between the fullback and the center back. There were also occasions where you'd see him drop off a bit deeper, attempting to get the ball on the outside of Ayew, and if he wasn't receiving the ball there, he'd check in and then look to push forward into that space between the lines as well. So it was clear that Havertz could receive the ball just ahead of the midfield bank, or he'd check in just ahead of Doucouré and Ayew, but we didn't see that on a consistent basis. And frankly, while Havertz was often situated in that pocket of space between the lines, it wasn't about him receiving the ball in that zone. It was strictly his movement that was essential for Arsenal here, because you'd often see him dragging back Doucouré and forcing him in towards the back line, and at times Palace would look like a back five. But there were situations where Doucouré allowed Havertz to continue his movement forward and trusted either the center back or the fullback to pick him up. But in those situations, now you witnessed Havertz at times occupying Doucouré and Anderson when he was in that zone, and that would free up space for Martinelli to get into 1v1s unless Ayew tracked back to make it a 1v2. And from there, you would see Havertz looking to make runs off of the space behind the fullback, and from there he would drag away a marker and create space for Martinelli to cut in on towards his right foot. Ultimately, the rotation was very clear here. If Havertz made a dart towards the touchline, Martinelli would look to cut on towards his right foot to gain a yard of space to either shoot or create for his teammates, and at times you'd expect Havertz to look to receive the ball in that zone as well. However, that wasn't the case, and what often happened on a recurring basis was the fact that Havertz would make the run into that zone, Martinelli would cut in and play the ball backwards or square it, and on the rare occasion you'd witness Havertz receiving the ball back and Martinelli drifting in towards his central area to place himself in a legitimate goal-scoring position. In the 23rd minute, you witness Martinelli receiving the ball, and it's a 1v1 with Havertz making the run off Ayew into that space. Martinelli is able to cut across the two defenders and slide the ball to Tomiyasu. As Martinelli drags away two markers, he plays the ball back towards Havertz, and you witness Martinelli just ahead of Doucouré and Ward. The touch from Havertz is a bit poor, and from here he squares the ball in towards Martinelli in left half space, and once again you witness the two players swapping positions to drag away their markers, but Martinelli is unable to shake off Doucouré, and as you can see, Havertz adopts a position in left half space and Martinelli's forced to go backwards. What ended up happening was that they struggled to get an opening down that side because they weren't necessarily playing passes in towards Havertz, making the runs in towards that space, and whenever Martinelli looked to cut in towards his right foot, he was forced to drop it back deeper, and they rarely got any crosses or shots off from those zones. In the second half, there were moments prior to Arsenal going down to 10 men where Havertz was shifting towards the touchline and Martinelli was tucking into that space between the lines. You'd see him dropping off, attempting to receive the ball in that space, or simply dropping ahead of the midfield bank, and from there Havertz was looking to make runs across the backline and in behind the backline to get into goal-scoring positions, and that simply just shows you the rotations that they were looking to adopt, along with Tomiyasu being played into the mix when he would step forward. Following that first clip that we watched, you witness Odegaard shifting in towards the left side of the pitch to make it a 4v3 overload, and it's Havertz playing the ball across Ayew for Odegaard playing it across Doucouré. It places Tomiyasu in a position where Martinelli is looking to make a run off the fullback, but Tomiyasu looks to square the ball in towards Saka in a legitimate goal-scoring position. And while there were a handful of occasions where Havertz played dangerous passes in the final third, specifically in the opening stages to Martinelli in left half space on mark, Havertz's main impact stemmed with his runs in between Ward and Anderson towards the penalty area. You'd witness his starting position in that space between the lines, but as Arsenal looked to progress their play, specifically down the right-hand side where Saka often got himself into 1v2s, you'd witness Havertz making darts in towards the penalty area to occupy occupy Henderson and Ward, and then that would create an avenue for Martinelli to make late runs towards the box and be unmarked in those zones, because Nketiah would be occupying Gahey or sometimes both center backs, and in that situation you witness Havertz dragging away Ward by making those runs in between Anderson and Ward. But in most of these scenarios it was Havertz making that run between the center back and the full back, Nketiah occupying the two center backs, which forces Ward to come across towards Havertz, and from there you have two aerial threats in Nketiah and Havertz around the 6-yard area, and if the crosses weren't played in towards them successfully, there was the outlet of Martinelli being unmarked towards the back post that could serve as a goal threat. However, when Arsenal got into these positions, specifically with Saka, he was either playing unsuccessful crosses that were cleared or making the wrong decision and firing shots that went wayward of the net. Following Saka's quick free kick that placed Thomas Partey free down the right channel, look at Havertz's starting positioning, and then look at him making that run in between Gahey and Anderson, and Nketiah occupying Ward, and that allows Thomas Partey to pick out an unmarked Martinelli at the edge of the box, but he volleyed his effort wide of the net. And then in the second half, you witness Thomas Partey receiving the pullback, you have Havertz and Nketiah occupying Ward and Anderson, and that allows Thomas Partey to clip the ball over both for Martinelli, placing him in a 1v1 with Anderson. He dragged the ball towards the byline, but his cross was cleared for a corner. So it was clear that Havertz was making runs behind the fullbacks to drag away markers and create space for Tomiyasu or Martinelli to cut in, and then allow himself to receive the ball freely in the wide area if they opted to play the ball back to him as they dragged markers towards the central zone. And it was also clear that if he was looking to isolate Ward, who he had the height advantage against, but he was also dragging away markers along with Nketiah for Martinelli to receive the ball freely if Arsenal looked to play the ball towards the back post. Outside of that, along with being very good in possession, playing safe passes towards his teammates, and being press resistant when he was on the ball in the midfield zone, what we also saw from Havertz is that when Arsenal lost possession in the final third, he did a very good job of instantly applying pressure towards the ball and winning it back. The same would be applicable in all areas of the pitch. When Arsenal lost possession or Crystal Palace had a loose touch in those zones, Havertz was often the first one to react towards the ball, and when he did, he was applying pressure to force the opponent into a mistake or concede a foul in a safe area, or he was doing a very good job of getting to the ball first, winning possession, and then forcing the opposing player in towards a foul. So as you can see, from a strictly systemic perspective, Kai Havertz didn't play poorly here, but his minimal impact in the final third is an area of concern that will require improvement moving forward.